Video, we're going to introduce this concept of proportions. So we're going to answer the questions, what is a proportion and how can you tell if two ratios form a proportion? So what is a proportion? A proportion is an equation that states that two ratios are equal. So ratios that are equal, we say they form a proportion. So when you just have two equal ratios or two equal fractions, that is a proportion. There's nothing more or nothing less to that. It's very simple. So two equal ratios or two equal fractions form a proportion. So here I've got three examples of proportions. 1/2 is equal to 2/4. Those two ratios are equal to each other, so we say that those two ratios form a proportion. 4/5 is equal to 12/15. Those two ratios form a proportion. And 16/24 is equal to 12/18. That is a proportion. Those two ratios are equal. So how can you tell if two ratios form a proportion? There's several ways we can do it. The first way would be to simplify each ratio to see if they are the same ratio. If two ratios simplify to the same ratio, then they're equal. If they're not equal, they will simplify to two different ratios. Or you can write the ratio as a decimal to see if they have the same decimal value. Or we can use something called cross products. Now, the cross product property says that cross products of equal ratios will be equal. So what is a cross product? A cross product is when you multiply the denominator of one fraction by the numerator of the other. So for example, here are the three ratios we said that were equal. And if we take the cross products, which would be the denominator of one fraction times the numerator of the other. So 4 times 1 here is 4. That's one of the cross products. The other cross product would be 2 times 2, which is also 4. So you can see that the cross products are both 4. So that is always going to be true when we have equal ratios. Those cross products are going to be the same number. So if we look at the next ratios, 4/5 is equal to 12/15. And if we look at those cross products, 15 times 4 is 60. And 5 times 12 is also 60. Those two cross products are equal. That way we know that the ratios are equal if the cross products are equal, because if they're not equal, their cross products won't be the same thing. And then lastly, if we check these, we know these two ratios are equal. 18 times 16 is 288, and 24 times 12 is also 288. These cross products are the same thing. They are equal. And that's the cross product property. Whenever you have two equal ratios, their cross products will be the exact same number. So do these ratios form a proportion? 6/8 and 9/12. Are these two equal to each other, in other words? So I'm going to show it three different ways, the ways that we talked about. We can simplify the ratios, we can write them as decimals, or we can check the cross products. All three methods will get you the same conclusion. You'll find out if they're equal or not, and sometimes it's easier to use one over the other. So let's simplify these ratios. 6/8 does simplify. It simplifies to 3/4. And 9/12 also simplifies, and in simplest form, that is 3/4. So you can see that these two ratios simplify to the exact same ratio of 3/4. So that tells me, yes, these two ratios form a proportion. They are equal. Or I can write them as decimals, and we learned how to do that. Write this ratio as a decimal, take 6 divided by 8, and when you do that, you get 0.75. And if you turn 9/12 into a decimal, 9 divided by 12 is also 0.75. These two decimal values are equal. So I know that those ratios form a proportion. They are equal. Or we can lastly check the cross products. 12 times 6 is 72. And 8 times 9 is also 72. The two cross products are equal. So yes, they form a proportion. We all got the same conclusion three different ways. So it really doesn't matter which method you use, you'll get the right answer either way. So here are a bunch of ratios, and we're just simply asking, do these ratios form a proportion? Most students find that the cross product is a little faster and a little easier to do. So that's what I'm going to do for most of these. This first one, 1/2, is that equal to 14/28? Do these form a proportion? Well, you might notice that 14/28, you can do mental math there. That is equal to 1/2 when you simplify it. So these do simplify to 1/2. So these do form a proportion. That one's kind of mental math, but I will check the cross products just to make sure. 28 times 1 is 28, and 2 times 14 is 28. So that checks out. Yes, these two ratios form a proportion. They are equal to one another. What about 6/8 and 4/7? Are these two ratios equivalent, or do they form a proportion? I'm going to check the cross products. 7 times 6 is 42, and 8 times 4 is 32. These are not the same cross product, so no, these two ratios are not equivalent. They do not form a proportion. Next, 7 over 2 and 27 over 8. Checking the cross products, I get 56 and 54. Again, these cross products are not the same thing, so no, these ratios are not equal. They do not form a proportion. 4/5 and 10/13, do these two ratios form a proportion? If I check the cross products, I get 52 and 50. Again, these are not equivalent, so these two ratios do not form a proportion. Next, 5/9 and 15/27. If you know that this one simplifies to 5/9, you'll know that yes, these do form a proportion, but checking the cross products, 27 times 5 is 135, and 9 times 15 is also 135. The two cross products are equal, so yes, these ratios form a proportion. And then lastly, 6 to 14 and 3 to 7, do these two ratios form a proportion? 7 times 6 is 42, and 14 times 3 is also 42. The cross products are equal, so yes, these ratios form a proportion. So pretty easy to do with the cross products, or if it's mental math, if you can simplify the ratio and you know that they simplify to the same thing, then that would be easy to do as well. But what happens when we have more complex ratios? Here we have some decimals within our ratio, so kind of a complex fraction. How can we tell if these two ratios are equal? Here we're going to lean on the cross products even more, and we're going to do 3.6 times 18. That's 64.8, and 12 times 4.8 is 57.6, and we can easily see that the cross products are not equal. So no, these two ratios do not form a proportion. They're not equal. Here we have two ratios written with the colon, so I'm just going to rewrite these as fractions, something we're probably a little bit more comfortable with. So 1/3 to 3 and 1/4 to 4. So here we have some complex fractions. We can still check the cross products here. And if we take 4 times 1/3, that's 4/3, or 1 and 1/3. And 3 times 1/4 is 3/4. And we can see that these two cross products are not the same thing. They are not equal. So no, those ratios do not form a proportion. And then lastly, again, we've got some fractions here that are written in ratio form with a colon. I'm going to rewrite these in fraction form, a couple of complex fractions, but we can still do this. We want to know if these two ratios are equivalent or if they form a proportion. So if I do my cross products, 4/5 times 1/4 is 1/5. That's my cross product. And 1/2 times 2/3 is 1/3. And you can see the two cross products are not equal. So no, these ratios are not equivalent. They do not form a proportion. So what is a proportion? Two equal ratios. How can you tell if two ratios form a proportion? Well, there were three methods to do that. You can simplify the ratios to see if they simplify to the same thing. You can write them as decimals to see if they have the same decimal value, or we can use the cross products to find out if we get the same thing.